Good evening. Welcome to the May 6, 2026 business session of the Planning Commission. We welcome all of the guests here as well as the staff and the fellow commissioners. Stepping into this evening, we will start off with any ex parte communications or conflicts of interest to disclose.
No.
No. All right, there are none. We will move forward to section 2.0 of the business session, which is general public comment session. Please note that the general public comment section is when you can speak on items that are not on the business session that are open for a hearing this evening. So if you do have any general public comments, this is now your time to discuss. I see none. So we will move forward to the business items and start off with project 3.1, actually project CUP-25-005. And the Planning Commission will review a request from Doug Shelby for a conditional use permit for the demolition of a historic structure, Cottonwood Paper Mill, at 6851 South Big Cottonwood Canyon Road. And we will have staff presentation on this.
All right, so I hate to disappoint you, but I don't have a presentation. We talked about everything in the work session. The applicant and their counsel are here if you have any questions for them or want to talk about anything else that we didn't cover, but.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and if you want to go back and review our work session meeting notes on this, you can feel free to do so. The applicants are here. Would you like to discuss anything in regards to additional details?
Hi, Dan Hammer here on behalf of the applicant. No, we're just here if you have additional questions or comments.
Wonderful. Thank you for being here. Any comments from the Planning Commission at this time?
Chair, I move that we postpone this item to September 2nd for review, but have it remain as a standing work session item on our agenda.
So just to clarify, to continue the item?
Continue,
Okay.
Wonderful.
not postpone, continue, excuse me.
We have a motion from Commissioner Mills.
Second.
And a second from Commissioner Shelton. And any discussion or deliberation on this? Wonderful. We will just go with a singular vote on this. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Moving forward, we will move to project ZTA-26-001, in which the Planning Commission will hold a public hearing to review a zoning text amendment request initiated by Nash Williams. The request is to amend City Code Chapters 19.75 and 19.76 to allow second utility meters for accessory dwelling units and guest houses under specific conditions. And we've got the staff presentation up here. So thank you, Emma.
Yeah, of course. Okay, this will be a good little refresher. Oops. Oh, sorry, 1 second. All right. So as talked about during the previous session, so this is just going to be a resident-initiated request by Nash Williams for a zoning text amendment to update sections 1975 and 76 of the city code. The proposed amendment would allow second utility meters for guest houses and detached accessory dwelling units in cases where existing utilities can't be adequately sized or upgrades would be unreasonable, while still requiring that the primary residents remain responsible for the billing associated with both meters. So under the existing code, 1975-050 prohibits the installation of separate utility meters for ADUs, and 1976-030 also prohibits separate utilities for guest houses. Over the past year, staff's received feedback from multiple residents that the code is overly restrictive, especially when physical site conditions or infrastructure limitations make connecting to the primary structure's utility meters impractical. This can create unnecessary financial and logistical burdens for residents trying to create an ADU or guest house. So Salt Lake County does have precedent of a similar code. So they do allow detached ADUs to be separately metered as long as the property owner is billed for both, as shown in this picture. And then this proposal came up because of an ongoing project. So Nash Williams is in the process of designing a casita at 3396 East Antler Way. The proposed location of this casita is approximately 194 feet from his power meter and 123 feet from his gas meter. However, there is power nearer to the proposed casita, which would only be 3 feet from the northeast corner of the property if you're allowed to have a second utility meter. So after talking with his utility companies, both Rocky Mountain Power and Enbridge Gas have recommended a second meter, which would greatly reduce the impacts to his existing landscaping and infrastructure, saving thousands of dollars in the process. And you can see in the image, circled in red is the location of the current utility meter, whereas his proposed casita is going to be way in the background of this picture, kind of near where that white truck is. And you can see that a little more clearly in this site plan. The existing power meter is indicated in red, as well as the existing home. And you can see the proposed casita, approximately 200 feet from the power meter. So the proposed wording, after speaking with the city attorney and using some of the language proposed by Nash Williams, would change 1975050 from saying the installation of separate utility meters for an ADU is prohibited to instead saying the installation of separate utility meters for an ADU is prohibited unless it can be demonstrated by the applicant with supporting documentation from the applicable utility provider that the existing utilities cannot be adequately sized for the ADU or that bifurcation from the principal residence cannot be reasonably achieved. In such cases, the property owner must be billed for both meters. And then similarly, 1976030 reads installation of separate utility meters for the guest house is prohibited. And then it says installation of separate utility meters for the guest house is prohibited unless it can be demonstrated by the applicant with supporting documentation from the applicable utility provider that the existing utilities cannot be adequately sized for the guest house or that bifurcation from the principal residence cannot be reasonably achieved. And then there was no public comments received. And then staff recommends that Planning Commission forward a recommendation of approval to City Council, just since the text amendment seems to maintain the original intent of the code to keep accessory dwelling units and guest houses both functionally and financially integrated with primary homes while still allowing flexibility for extenuating circumstances.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. And we do have the applicant here. Do you have any additional comments to the presentation that you would like to discuss?
I just wanted to offer up on the narrative that I provided with this. It gives a pretty clear description as to the conditions that I've got, but I'm not going to be unique, and anybody in the future that may need to do this with a ADU, it just becomes unreasonable and a burden, and ADUs are allowed by Cottonwood Heights. And by definition, I thought a ADU is a rental property. And so I'm not trying to subdivide, and you already have language that precludes subdividing a property in the future, for instance. So I just don't see any exceptions in there. And this is my means to be able to do that. Otherwise, it's a pretty expensive cost. It's another $30,000 or so. Plus, where you saw that power panel is a 200 amp power panel. To change that up to a 400 amp and then pipe it underneath those, the trees and the landscaping I've got in place, be incredibly destructive. And so that's the reason for it and justification. And I think you've got other means and language in your own standards that'll preclude doing things that you don't want to have done under an ADU.
Great. And I do have a question. So currently it is in regards to ADU as well as guest house. What is kind of the determining factor between making the language change between ADUs and guest house?
Probably for legacy purposes. Right now, my wife and I have no interest in renting the property. It's a part of our own property. So if we were to try and rent the separated unit, I'm trying to get it allowed for our children in the future if they choose to sell it. It just adds a greater value to have a licensed, legal ADU. And so why not do that? It's allowed now, and I'm freer with my time. I don't have a day job, so allows me to do that and move forward on it. That's the reason that I'm doing it.
Wonderful.
So, but it wouldn't change the circumstance. It just happens to be us where we don't have that need to have a rental property there.
Thank you. So, and actually, we will open up to public comments in just a moment. So,
Okay. Did you have any other question?
any other questions from the commission? Wonderful.
It's good to see Jim back. I haven't seen you for a long time. Side comment, sorry, but I remember working with him for quite a while earlier on this. We've been working on this for well over a year.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, thanks for hearing me out.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. We will now move to the public hearing period of the meeting. This is a time that you will be able to speak on behalf of any applications that are in regards to the ZTA-26-001. And then state your name and address as well.
Oliver Williams, 3482 East Oakledge Road, Conwood Heights, Utah, 84121. Nash's son. The only comment I was going to make was the building and the planning and the way he's planning on building it, it's set back. So in the future, if we were trying to sell it as a separate unit, we wouldn't be able to because of the setback limits. So like, unless we were to tear apart the structure and set it back, what, 8 feet, 10 feet?
Because of the pool, not a lake property.
Yeah. So we wouldn't be able to set it back and sell it as a separate property from the primary residence where they currently live. That was all I was going to add.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. It doesn't look like we have any additional public comments in the audience tonight. So we will now close public comments and move forward to Planning Commission deliberation on this.
So back to our previous conversation, a couple of thoughts I had. One is, are we setting a precedent by changing this code that anytime a code is inconvenient for a homeowner? I mean, we can consider whatever we want. I just want us to keep in mind that, do we change the code anytime it's costly? Or do we review code, I guess is the right word. I'm just throwing it out there.
No, I will tell you just in my time on the Planning Commission that some of the very best ideas in terms of the housekeeping with our code, we're a young city. And so almost more than 50% of our work has been mop up and adding
Sure.
things as opportunities arise. And it is a little bit of, it's obviously opportunistic for the property owner, but it also becomes a little bit of housekeeping, making sure that it's like, well, it will be precedent setting and will definitely benefit this property owner. I think your lens is correct to just make sure, again, for good hygiene, that it benefits him, but it also really benefits.
Sure, and I'm not disagreeing necessarily. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. And then the other question I had is, or comment, is that I don't think that for a guest house, that the 2 meters should, I think this focus should be on having ADUs, being able to have 2 meters, not guest houses, because of the process that you have to go through for ADU. It's just a different responsibility, I guess, if you will, for having an ADU. So I'm not in favor of 2 meters for guest houses.
I would agree with you on that. And I believe there's a lot more hurdles that you need to go through for an ADU to get
yeah.
the ADU permit, where guest house is, there's less red tape for the city to better understand what the process and what the use is going to be truly out of that. And once again, I'm not speaking specifically in regards to the applicant's property, but this is going to be a city code amendment. So we don't want to allow for any abuse that is, potentially associated with that. So I would agree with you, Commissioner Anderson, on that. And I think we should really focus on this text amendment around ADUs, just due to the red tape that is required under that.
So let me just offer a different point of view, which is in this circumstance, this is a pretty common problem where it's really about the logistics of providing power to a new structure, right? And because the logistics make it way more expensive one way than the other way, we say, hey, it makes sense here that because it'll cost you a lot less to get a separate meter than to use the same one, we let you do it. What you want to use it for seems like a secondary problem. It doesn't seem like the primary question. So for me, first of all, it's a text amendment. It's not about this particular property. This property brought it up, but it's a citywide idea. And for me, citywide to say, if a landowner decides that it's better for him to put in a separate meter that they accept the bill for as if it were their, the bill, both bills come to the same place and are paid by the same party, I'm just fine with that. I don't think it creates any risk for abuse that is more likely to be abused than just the straight up ADU allowance today. So I would approve it for both because I think the conditions are very similar. The fact that we make them go through greater grief to approve an ADU doesn't mean it's any more valid by power for an ADU than it is for a guest house. Why would we force a guest house to go to this more ridiculous route to get one? This doesn't make sense to me. Lastly, for me, part of this is really about what's good for the city, and for the city to continually review things like this where they don't add any value. It just churns time. It's not helpful. And one of the things that I think our code really could use is that kind of review, which says if there's not a good reason for us to review this and demand all of these things, then let's save everyone the grief. The staff, the planning commission, and the landowner. So that's my point of view.
And I would agree with the fact of removing the hoops that's in the language and just say, I'm still thinking through the guest house with having just to automatically be allowed to have a separate meter without going through a process on a guest house. Am I going to die on the sword about it? But I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I do think we should change the proposed language to say two meters are allowed on ADUs going to one.
And I'm okay even with detached ADUs.
Yeah, right, exactly. We do need to add detached ADU in there.
I do want to just raise a concern that if you were to go to Salt Lake City right now, which we're not in Salt Lake City, but typically under the multifamily designation, that is how you can get multiple meters for a single family or for any dwelling is in multifamily land use. So in order to get multiple meters, just because it's now allowing for an easier path to having multiple families in one space. So if you are
Not really, it's just providing for an easier path to power the buildings they live in. The path for them to be multiple families in one space already exists.
But how do we, not necessarily, how do we regulate the A and B so that the power company is now going to have two separate unique codes to one single family home? So as a city, we're not regulating that. So if it's sent to, 1001A or sent to 1001B, those are now two unique addresses or two unique codes for that single family. So now there is a designation that's now allowing for two separate billing addresses under most utility companies. So I think that that's more so of kind of the concern. I think that, once again, this specific site, I don't have concern of that. But if there's somebody that's now having a multifamily situation with a guest house that they didn't have to go through the appropriate hoops to get an ADU, so they just did a guest house, there's just more opportunity for abuse.
I have a question for you two, because I'm inclined to agree. with Commissioner Shelton on this, but I need a clarification. I don't live in this ADU world. So if I understand what you're saying, Chair, is that in Salt Lake City, that this is one of the potential barriers to entry that allows for a little bit of, informal policing to make sure that you have to check this box in order to proceed. If we approve this, that basically anybody can do this, we are granting that just having a second meter in no way, shape, or form grants you approval for an ADU in Cottonwood Heights. It simply is a matter of convenience, to Commissioner Shelton's point. So we, as a separate issue, have to have confidence that in our ability to police ADUs. And I mean, that's a bigger.
And guest houses.
And guest houses, and guest houses that are being used as ADUs illegally. So if we remove that barrier, Commissioner Shelton, just to in the favor of property rights and ease of use for an owner, do we have confidence in our ADU regulatory process that removing this barrier to entry, we're still going to be able to police ADUs, and that this is not a significant way to regulate that? Are you confident that and I would, maybe I'd ask Commissioner Shelton as well. So, I mean, if this traditionally has been a barrier in other jurisdictions, what I would be frustrated about is if somebody comes and makes the argument, I want an ADU because power's already been run to this, utilities have already been run, and that has been determined to be a threshold for an ADU. If that's factual, then I'm with these guys, Commissioner Shelton. If it's simply a matter of function that we can just say, listen, we're just trying to make it easy, decrease costs, and make some easy pathway for a homeowner, I'm on board.
So look at the code and understand what's required to have approved an attached ADU. It's pretty difficult.
Detached?
A detached ADU. And in this case, we're saying our big fear is that somebody who didn't have to go through that process built a guest house. And then I guess the fear we have is that they then might use it as an ADU.
Correct.
And so what we'll do to prevent that is make them buy power a more expensive way. That's where it just disconnects for me. I don't understand why that forcing them to buy power through the main meter has much bearing on whether they use it as an ADU or not. It's just that you create a barrier that's entirely unnecessary and doesn't give you anything better.
So part of the ADU, my understanding, and I would imagine Jim and Emma would be able to give some additional light to this, but my understanding is the ADU, there has to be owner occupancy for
In the primary
in the
dwelling.
primary dwelling.
Yes.
So in this circumstance now for owner occupancy, there's certain qualifications that go into that. And typically there's like a billing process that we're going to go through, and we're going to want to look for mail. In this space that you are seeing, you can now have two separate addresses that are in place, truly, that are designated with the electric companies and the gas companies, that are two unique addresses for this site. Address number 1A and address number 2B.
Which would be true whether it's guest house or ADU.
Correct. But right now, if it's ADU, even in our current way that it's presented, there is only one address that can be associated because there's only 1 meter for any ADU today. So with ADU, so
Well,
now,
with the exception of this language, which would then permit it anyway, right?
correct. So what this is now allowing for is more of a multifamily opportunity in single-family zonings, because now it's much easier for you to bill address number 1A, address number 2B under this. So with that, there's just more autonomy that you're going to have behind that. And that's why addressing is such a major component behind multifamily as well as single-family, and why owner occupancy, I think, is part of the actual code behind ADUs. So I think that that's a major component here. The ease factor, I think, is one factor behind this, but that's part of the inherent built-in regulation behind ADUs where owner occupancy is an important component behind it. And I think that that's the factor that we have to look at with this, where we're now allowing for a multifamily, a unique standard of multifamily to be implied on a single family dwelling if somebody has a guest house or an ADU, where if somebody has an ADU today, it's very difficult to allow for a multifamily unless they're checking every single box under the ADU regulation to allow for it, and which is a single family dwelling. If you have two tenants and the tenant in the front, so let's just say we have an ADU today that is not complying with the ADU regulation of owner occupancy in the primary residence, you are now relying on the mail to go to, the tenant number one, and he's also distributing for the ADU in the back. So that's one of the factors here where it has to technically be an owner occupied unit there. So then he can then bill kind of like a rub to the back unit there. So there's a lot of different factors, but that's just one situation where it's inherent in the code right now, where it just makes it more difficult for multifamily rentals to go into single family neighborhoods, which I don't think the ADU regulation is even allowing that. And that's my concern with this in a lot of, like, this going citywide. My concern is if this language goes citywide, we are now allowing for a rental family in the front, a rental family in the back, and it's going to be very hard to regulate that.
But that's not what we're saying, because it's still, regardless, the ADU has to be owner occupied. The primary resident has to be owner occupied. It can't be, they can't rent, it can't be a renter here and another renter in the back. With ADU,
Two
And
unique.
a guest house is just the
the
same.
same thing.
That you have to have.
I know I'm kind
They
of being-
can't be a
going
renter
back
in
on
the
my
back.
thought,
They
but-
can just be a guest.
Correct. But by
So-
allowing for 2 meters, it is harder to manage and regulate that because you now have two unique codes within the billing system behind how they're able to do this. And this is why I've never seen 2 meters allowed on a single family dwelling. If you guys have any case, and potentially if anybody
But I don't think
on
we're
staff has that.
looking to allow 2 meters on a single family. We're allowing for a meter at the primary residence and then a meter at the ADU. And then the address, all mail would have to go to one address, not, I mean, it's still the primary, the owner is responsible, and that's the person in the primary residence.
So I think that that's where we have to be very careful with this one. Because if you look at attached, so once again, attached ADUs are very easy to do here. And the reason that they're easy is because you can really manage the structure of the owner occupancy of the space. And that's why it's so easy to do it here, where detached ADUs are very difficult. So I think the difficulties behind detached ADUs, there's a lot of inherent reasons for that, and a lot of it has to do with prevention of multifamily dwellings in residential neighborhoods. Truly, if you go into the depths of the ADU structure, that is why there's so many gates that are preventing exactly what's being proposed here. And that's where I think, because it is difficult to get an ADU in Cottonwood Heights, I am comfortable with the ADU language because there's a lot more hoops to jump through. I am less comfortable with the guest house because there's less, it's easier for the guest house to turn into a illegal ADU with all the hoops that are going into place, truly. So that's just kind of my thought process behind this. Do we have any examples as far as where this precedent has been set in either other communities or, where this could be an allowance?
Yeah, so I mean, Farmington has gone as far as creating lots for ADUs where they can be individually sold as a separate lot. So, I mean, that's one extreme, but I know that, Emma took this language from the county, so the county already allows a second meter for an ADU. And I don't think they distinguish between attached or detached. I think they just say it's allowed.
They say it has to just be, it's for detached only.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. not for
So
internal.
I think everyone's raised a lot of really great points and questions. I'm probably more in line with what Commissioner Shelton has mentioned, that the structure's there. It's really a question of getting utilities to the structure regardless of what it's used for, even if it's a garage, right? I mean, that's not really the conversation here, but we've had requests to say, hey, we're going to build a big shop in the back. I want a welder, I want to have a bigger power source. Can we do a second meter? Our answer has always been, well, no, you can't, because it's not allowed. You can only have one. So I think it's really the logistical question of serving a structure that would be allowed anyways. I think the regulatory enforcement element of it, the code already does a pretty good job with requiring, notarized affidavits at the county. We could make those even more clear as to what the permit is approved for. And that's also part of the city's review, is when we receive a building permit for something like this, we have very clear notes on the permit itself. This is not authorized as an ADU, or this is only authorized as a guest house, or whatever permit they're applying for. We make it clear during the review and after it's issued that, like, don't confuse what this actually is. And then we record something at the county to the same tune of clarifying what it is. So if we did have an instance down the road where something was being used, illegally or out of what it was originally approved for, we have something then look back on and say, no, we have record it wasn't approved as that. If you'd like to change it, you can go through this process. But I guess that's my view. The addressing thing is true as far as utilities are concerned. I don't know if the post office would assign an address, or if our GIS department would recognize a second address point for a parcel. If it's simply for billing purposes, then it would be separate. But I guess as far as enforcing the ordinance for the land use and the approval, there's tools that we have that we can do that. So I don't know if approaching an amendment through the lens of what someone might do to abuse it is the best approach, just because that's with anything, right? Anyone can abuse anything we approve. But that's why we have safeguards in the code to say, to be very clear up front of what the approval is. And then if someone's not in compliance, we can then go back and
May I ask, do you have the same opinion with guest house? We spoke specifically on ADUs, but
yeah, I
on a
think
guest house standpoint, do you have the same perspective?
yeah, and I think that's why initially we had the language in there that it would only be allowed under certain circumstances, right? To not just open the gate for everyone that could easily access the current meter. Because I do see both of your points, right? That maybe we don't want to open the door for everyone everywhere, but it does make a lot of sense in some cases where, for example, Mr. Williams's property, logistically, it just doesn't make sense. And I guess to go back on Commissioner Anderson's question, no, we don't entertain everyone's ideas of a text amendment. There's a lot of discussion in meetings. I mean, we've met with Nash, I don't know how many times before we even recommended that he submit an application for a text amendment, because we recognized that it just made sense in his scenario. And there's been other instances in the city that have brought up the same concern. So when we get repeated requests like that, we sit back and think, okay, well, this is coming up over and over. Does it make sense to change the policy? And in this case, we thought it did. So I guess there's a few approaches we could take. One is the language as drafted by staff to say it's allowed, but under certain scenarios. There's another option to say it's allowed without any special conditions attached as far as logistics or difficulty, or we just say, no, it's not allowed, or anywhere in between. I think it's really up to you and the council to make that decision. But we as staff felt that the way it was drafted achieved both ends, that it's allowed where needed, but not necessarily allowed where it's not needed.
So my comfort is around this text language for ADUs personally. And just based on where we're at with it, I think the way that ADUs are structured, and I believe we've got a really good external ADU process in the city, as well as good code around external ADUs. I don't have the same comfort with guest houses. And my reasoning behind that is there's too much gray area. Somebody's going to look at, I need to build an ADU, or I'm willing to take the risk on going for a guest house. And there's too much opportunity to allow for that gray area and then just rely on, I'm going to ask for forgiveness after that. And my experience, especially around multifamily and the way that multifamily is structured, multifamily is technically an ADU structure today. However, that's two separate families where there's going to be a higher reliance on the ability to have a single family home owner be able to offset their costs here. And I think that that's the ultimate goal that we're trying to see here, is that offset of costs to be able to afford the living and allow for potential rental abilities to the space. But we have to be very careful to not allow for any amount of gray area to come into place where, let's just say, a guest house now has a separate meter and they're also so they're renting out the single family dwelling and they're renting out the guest house. And we now have two families there that are not related and they don't have ownership over it. So you don't have the same barriers to manage within the city to ensure that they're going to be using it the way that we were planning on this to be used after the approval. So I think that that's what my concern is from a guest house standpoint. I think that if somebody's willing to go through this process, if we do approve this for guest houses, I would state, if it exceeds a certain amount of distance, from the home, we have to maybe create additional barriers and guardrails in place on it that I would like to discuss further. But
If what is a certain distance?
if the guest house is a certain distance.
But aren't there rules in place for how
Yeah, so
guest houses can be built?
yeah, so the current code, so actually right before the section we're talking about right now, it does say the rental or lease of a guest house or the use of a guest house as a permanent residence for a second family on the premises shall be prohibited. So it is pretty explicit. You can't just have a second family permanently living there at that point. So it is truly just for guests, I guess.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, that the way someone uses a guest house isn't really determined on if there's a meter there or not. I think it's that the guest house is there and they're either going to rent it or they're not. They're either going to comply or they're not. But I don't know if that's going to be a result of having a second meter or not. So I don't know if there's a direct correlation between someone abusing the guest house. I don't know if the thought process is, hey, we have a second meter here, let's use it illegally, or hey, it's all on one meter, we better not rent it out because it's on one meter. I mean, I get that there's a perception from a purchaser's standpoint, which is why we record something at the county. So when the property's transferred, in the title report, something pops up and says, hey, you have an ADU that you can rent according to city code. Or, hey, you have a guest house that cannot be rented. And we do the same thing for second kitchen affidavits, where some folks might want to have a kitchen in their basement, but that's not an ADU. We record an affidavit at the county saying, you have a second kitchen, but it's not an ADU. So there are some safeguards in place there that help the owners and the future buyers understand what is or isn't allowed. But at the end of the day, there's no way to ensure 100% compliance, and that's why we have code enforcement to handle.
And I think that you could have with 1 meter an ADU and people not being owner occupied and having renters. I mean, it could be a violation of
So
code, however it's defined.
I think a potential solution.
And I know I'm being hypocritical of what I said earlier, but
No, it's
So
it's
I
okay.
think that the main reason, though, is, if you have a landlord account for a space, you're going to have two separate unique meter codes for that property. So I think that that's what we have, and you're not able to do that unless you have two separate meters. So there's zero regulation, and it just makes it easier. It makes it easier for people to abuse the system. Now, once again, this is a text amendment that we're looking at here. So a text amendment is something where we're making it easier for people to abuse something, or we're making it easier for somebody to get something accomplished within the city. I am very, very much so somebody that promotes for people to come and make text amendments when there's issues and when they run into it. But this is for the whole city, and I want to make sure that we do this right, especially around multiple meters, because typically when you see multiple meters on a single family dwelling, there's some type of a multifamily code designation that you're going to be seeing from that. So
Yeah,
then,
and
as a buyer that's, potentially buying one of these homes that has this, they're now going to say, great, I'm going to get a landlord account on this. There's nothing between Rocky Mountain Power and Cottonwood Heights that's going to prevent them to go and get a landlord account and have it billed out to Unit A and Unit B. And that's, a multifamily situation.
Well, but there is though, because it has to be owner occupied.
There's
The
not.
primary,
If
yeah, the
I went to Rocky
primary.
Mountain Power,
No, I'm saying from a Cottonwood Heights code
Yeah,
perspective, we can't control what happens with how people talk to Rocky Mountain Power, but we
but we can
can.
right now with ADUs.
Yeah, and I understand what Commissioner Steinman's saying, and there's valid points that he's making. I think a compromise and a potential solution is, if you go back to the proposed language for the ADU. So here, I think it's up to you all as to, for an ADU specific that's detached, if it's just allowed, or if they have to demonstrate that they don't, if they meet those criteria that are outlined here. I think that's pretty straightforward. I would be fine with saying a second meter on a detached ADU is permitted. That's subject to all the ADU standards. And then if you go to the guest house slide, I think if it were to move forward, keeping it as drafted to say a second meter on a guest house is only allowed if they can demonstrate that it's difficult, the utility providers say that they can't do it. That, again, provides some guardrails for the guest house element of it. That's, I think, the concern.
Can we get an owner affidavit for guest houses?
I believe we already do.
We don't currently. We've talked with Shane about working on
Okay.
that though.
So
So
we
I'm
could
comfortable.
certainly do
I'm
that.
comfortable if we can get owner affidavits for guest
Yeah.
houses and for. I mean, we're already getting it on ADU.
Right, right.
So I think if we can have that assurance, so then there's one additional guardrail that we put up for a guest house, and I think it's only guest houses that are applying for a separate meter. Truly, I think that's really.
I think you'd have to say for anyone applying for a guest house, they have to do an affidavit. I don't think it's.
Yeah, and we can already, we've already got a template with the ADU. It wouldn't be difficult to record that. So I guess just based on that proposal, I'd just like to get your thoughts on, what would you be comfortable with a detached ADU?
So
If
can
you're a
I,
little more hesitant with the guest house, we can still carry forward this language to say it's really only allowed if it's really difficult to not have a shared meter.
I'd like to propose the language for both if I could, and then see what. So flip to the other one. Let's start with it. So the installation of separate utility meters for a detached ADU is permitted so long as the property owner must be billed for both meters. So that's my proposal for that language. If you flip over, I think the installation of separate utility meters for the guest house is permitted for, I don't know, is there such thing as a detached guest house, or are they all detached? Okay, so for a guest house is permitted so long as both, go back again to the other, so long as the owner is billed for both meters. And then I am fine with the recommendation that we add the requirement for an affidavit for the guest house as a requirement to have an approved guest house. That's what and I move that we forward that recommendation to the city council for their,
I'll second that.
We have a we have a motion from Commissioner Shelton and a second from Commissioner Mills.
We make sure just for staff or from the notes that we captured that right. Who wants to do that? Is that a Sydney thing? You got it?
Can I just double check it all really fast?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, the installation of separate utility meters for, oh wait, here, oh, okay, perfect. For a detached ADU is permitted as long as the property owner is billed for both meters, right? Okay. And then the next one would be the installation of separate utility meters for the guest house is permitted as long as the property owner is billed for both with as long as we also have some sort of affidavit. Is that correct?
so long as they're billed for both meters. In the previous section, require an affidavit, just the same way you do. So it's not in this section.
Yeah.
It's in a code section. You haven't recommended the amendment, but just use the same language that you do in the detached ADU. There.
And we have a motion and a second and some additional deliberation. Any further deliberation on this?
Can you make sure your microphone's turned on just for the record? Thank you.
I think we've had a very productive discussion on this that has brought into my awareness a lot of the issues, and I think we've worked this through pretty well. I like the proposal, the recommendation that's been made.
Wonderful. Thank you. We will now move forward to a vote and start off with Commissioner Barnes, Commissioner Shelton,
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson,
Yes.
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Polson,
Yes.
Commissioner Smith,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinman, yes. We will move forward with a recommendation to the City Council on the text amendment for Project ZTA-26-001.
I move that we approve the minutes, the consent agenda, April 1, 2026 Planning Commission minutes.
Commissioner Mills moves to approve.
Second.
Commissioner Anderson seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.